Hellblade II had surprisingly big shoes to fill. While Hellblade I was a slightly lesser-known title, it grew in prestige and praise over the years, with the main actor, Melina Juergens, earning numerous awards and attention for her work as Senua, and the team at Ninja Theory showcasing impressive technology with the Unreal 5 engine. Many longtime fans and even new fans of Hellblade were expecting something great out of Hellblade II. Since the launch of Hellblade 1 in 2017, a lot has changed for Ninja Theory. They were acquired by Xbox, which would put any concerns about funding at ease, and since the launch of Hellblade 1, they've grown in studio size from around 100 employees to 120 to now over 140. This is why it's somewhat odd to imagine that they have big shoes to fill with Hellblade 2. They're a larger studio, they're owned by one of the largest companies in the world, and they're leveraging the latest technology in Unreal 5. And from where I sit, as a huge fan of the first Hellblade, they just needed to make the game, the sequel, a little bit bigger in size and maybe a little bit longer in length and a little bit better with respect to gameplay and mechanics. Well, why? Why would it only need to be a little bit better? Well, because in my estimation, the first game is a masterpiece. Some games don't need to completely reinvent the wheel to have the sequel stand strong. God of War Ragnarok is a good example of this. So is Spider-Man 2, or even Horizon Forbidden West. All those games expanded upon what made their predecessors so good, but they didn't completely reinvent the wheel either. My excitement about Hellblade 2 slowly turned to concern after the previews a few weeks ago. And those concerns felt as if they made landfall when the reviews started hitting on the release date of the game. And after just an hour and a half in the game with myself playing it, I have to say, it is a regressive disappointment. And I absolutely hate saying that. This was my most anticipated game of 2024, and there's so much to praise in Hellblade 2, and ultimately, I do plan on finishing the game. But a massive emphasis and focus on graphical fidelity and technical enhancements, like motion capping all the combat animations, it just drags the game down in quality, and it drags it backward instead of forward. Now, every weekday here at Reforge Gaming, I tell you what I think about a gaming topic, and then we go into a live stream where I want to hear what you think. So, if you want more, hit subscribe and hit like. Now, in this video, I'm going to start with the good, because I'm a huge fan, and they're hitting really great notes with this game. But then, I'm going to have to walk through the bad, because the bad elements unfortunately really hurt the experience, and they confirm a lot of what I heard from the other review outlets. Lastly, I will give you my conclusion, and I'll talk about why I do plan to finish the game, but I will talk about what I would likely think if I didn't have any connection to the previous game. When it comes to the good aspects of Hellblade 2, there is certainly plenty to praise. Unfortunately, a lot of what I'm about to praise is partly the cause of the bad things, but they are still worth mentioning, because perhaps a better balance could be pushed for in the next game, if and when that ever happens. So first, the graphics. This game is undeniably one of the best looking games that I have ever played, from Senua's various facial expressions, to the reflections in the water, to the lighting and the environments, and even to the grotesque and the ominous enemies, as well as the other characters that you're going to encounter. Everything hits a tone of almost too good to be true. Now, this will likely be one of the games that we remember as the first to achieve levels of realism with the Unreal Engine that doesn't diminish the minute that you actually play the game. I truly think the game looks remarkable, even when in motion or in the intense combat sequences. It's one of the rare times I can say, yeah, it looks as good as those super polished trailers. Hellblade 2 makes me think that we will slowly start seeing the benefits of Unreal 5 pay off, even if optimization isn't quite there yet for the consoles. I was playing at 1440 on medium settings, and I was maintaining 60 FPS on a 2080 Ti rig. Now, you can't talk about Hellblade without mentioning sound design, so the graphics are great, but so is the sound. This is one area of the game that I really wasn't worried about. All the developers that in the work that they put into, they really justified my lack of concern. Everything about the sound design is superb. Simple things like the layering of sound to make the spatial audio effect of rain and wind feel almost real. And then you have the environmental sounds. There's distant threats and voices. And you can't praise the audio and the sound design team of Hellblade if you don't mention the use of voices. The binaural audio is just as effective, if not more effective, in this game versus the first, to the point that I had folks watching the stream and they said that the voices were putting them on edge or they were annoying them. Now, I get some gamers are not going to enjoy the effects of the game using those voices in Senua's head, but I think that's proof that they're doing their job, which means they were executed well. But more than just voices or rain, the music is once again stellar. There was one poignant moment very early in the game where Senua makes a significant decision, and as it did, the music started swelling, and it creates what I like to call the wash over the player effect. There were a few times in the first game where the subtle use of music creates this full body immersion effect where the music almost washes over you. It's distant, it slowly swells, and it's timed with the gameplay or a cinematic moment, and I almost can't describe how it feels. It's almost like an ASMR effect if you watch that type of content. The voices do this as well at times, which is a great way, I think, to make the player feel comforted just before shattering that comfort with a chance of the scenery changing or the dark world comes rushing and crashing back in. So I'm happy to say that the music is once again being used to great effect. And right along with the sound and the voices deserving praise, I have to talk about the writing and the voice acting. Doing cool things with spatial audio and making the player feel a sense of unease, it wouldn't be nearly as potent if the voice actors and the writing weren't so strong. The writing creates a sense of foreboding and even irritation, especially for fans of the first game. They expertly have story elements from the first game creep back in, giving you a sense of uncertainty and fear. Did Senua really escape? Is she actually in a better place now? Is she stronger now? And the voice actors elevate the writing with their tone and their presence. Senua's father, the voice actor, just does a wonderful earthen-like rumble with his voice. It's truly scary, and Druth makes a return with the great lore and storytelling when you find a rune. So that's the graphics, the sound design, the music, the writing, and the voice acting. All of that serves the last thing that I want to praise before we move on to the bad: the tone and the story. I have to disagree with the reviews that were saying that the story felt muddled or flat. I think that the story starts incredibly strong. That could be my connection to the first game playing a role, especially when they start bringing up things like Dillion, but maybe the story progresses and it starts to falter, or maybe it fails to get traction the further you play. But I was once again just entranced by the story moments or the scene switches when you aren't really sure what's real and what's not. And the tone of the game is exactly what I hope for from a Hellblade sequel. It's dark, it's twisted, it's disturbing, but it's not needlessly gory or excessively gross. But even with all of this praise, all these great things, the good elements of Hellblade 2, well, they struggle to get the game off the ground as the weight of the bad things drag it down. It might seem odd to have any significant complaints about the game after giving it so much high praise in so many categories, but a game like Hellblade rises and falls on immersion. The first game is easily one of the most immersive games that I have ever played, to the point that I've often told people it's more than a game, it's an experience. Well, imagine the last time you were at the movies, and maybe the sound was messing up, or somebody was talking, or maybe there was a crying baby. Immersive experiences are very delicate. The more enthralled and the more focused you get, the easier it is for the slightest hiccup to just shatter the illusion. Well, the elements that hurt Hellblade 2 are more than hiccups. They are foundational design choices that harm integral parts of the game. So let's just start with the combat, because this is probably the most egregious aspect. And before I jump into why the combat's so bad, I want to address pushback and things that I'm seeing said about combat. Many are quick to say, well, combat's not important, or it didn't play a big role in the first game. This is simply not true. Combat had a very consistent and rhythmic presence in the first game. Entire sections are dedicated to fighting your way through mobs and mobs of enemies. Sections like the Blood River have you fighting waves and waves of enemies, as does many other sections of the game. The Valravan fight is easily one of my favorite fights due to its speed and its reliance and use of parries. And then the Cert fight, it's epic, it's cinematically strong. He looks great. The setting is fantastic. Anybody claiming that combat is not that important or it didn't play a big role in the first game, they're either misremembering or they just flat out never played it. So given that ground and that foundation from the first game, you may have noticed even in some of the clips that we use in this section of the video, right from Hellblade 1, that the combat it's fluid. It's somewhat basic, but there's this moment-to-moment aspect that really made it enjoyable. Quickly dispatching of someone to do that really well with a timed parry or a dodge, only to quickly have to parry a new enemy as they cut in from the side or they try to interrupt you. It was very satisfying. Well, all of that simple charm and player agency and fluidity, it's gone in Hellblade 2. They went with something that I can only describe as regressive, bad, and unenjoyable. Instead of feeling a sense of player volition and moment-to-moment choice and impact and flow, it feels broken apart, scripted, and like a string of QuickTime events that aren't really QuickTime events. Instead of seamlessly parrying and launching into a combo, a perfect parry is now a short cinematic moment, and then you transition into the player either sort of slashing the enemy or you execute them. There were even times that the game would interrupt my animation as I started to swing at a stunned enemy, and then it would awkwardly move me into a scripted execution animation. And then someone would hurl themselves at you, and then you have to do it all over again. The best way I can describe it is that instead of pressing buttons and seeing immediate actions taking place, you press buttons that trigger predetermined scripted animations. And this is because every single animation in combat has been mocapped. So the trailers look fantastic. They look visceral and realistic. Even people watching my stream gameplay thought, it looks great. What are you talking about? Because the execution, it just feels terrible. You feel like you're triggering a constant flow of mini scripted movies instead of fluidly moving from one action to the next. It doesn't feel like a moment-to-moment action sequence with grit and charm. It feels like a drawn-out QuickTime event that doesn't really want to be a QuickTime event. I started to feel this in the first boss fight. He has 2 axes, and he's got great writing, great voice acting. It was perfect for sort of an early face-off with somebody who's not just like another nameless grunt. But so much of the fight was scripted, it started to actively work against my efforts to get better at timing my parries or my attacks. No matter how well I performed, some scripted grab or throw or dialogue sequence was waiting for me. Now, at first I brushed this off. I thought, well, early boss fights are like this, right? Sometimes there's a scripted fail where you can't beat the boss, or there's a predetermined outcome. But then I got to the infamous sort of red fiery area fight, and some of this is from the trailers, and this is where I saw the combat for what it was. A few of the early fights had me wondering, well, why were folks being so critical of the combat? Why did they say that it felt like QuickTime events? But then I fought probably 5 or 6 enemies in a row, and I quickly felt every single problem with the changes to combat sort of all converging together. And remember, combat played a huge role in the first game. It was how they tricked you into thinking that you could permanently die. It was how the game moved the story along with boss fights and waves of enemies. It's literally how the game ends. You have wave after wave of enemies as you charge forward. To have the combat regress this much, it's more than disappointing. It's immersion breaking. It's massively damaging to the game's overall quality. Remember, as I said, immersive experiences are delicate. To have this happen in combat, it absolutely shatters the illusion and it reminds you that you're playing a video game. Think of games like Batman, the Arkham games, or Assassin's Creed. Their basic melee combat always got better with each game. It didn't get worse. It didn't regress backwards and take fluidity or player agency away from you. Timing perfect parries is probably the only part that I found enjoyable, but it quickly becomes tedious as every perfect parry just triggers this mini cinematic. I remember running at enemies in the first game, and I would sort of attack them if there was an opportunity or a moment. I remember timing parries as like a second or third enemy would kind of come in out of the frame, but there are no multi-target fights in this game. Everybody sort of waits their turn. It plays like a string of bad pearls as each enemy takes their turn in the Rock'em Sock'em QuickTime event fight simulator. It just pairs terribly with the other thing that I have to criticize: the pacing and the game length. The combat does not pair well with this at all. Knowing that the game is only about 5 to 6 hours to complete, it makes my first hour and a half in the game just incredibly disappointing. So much overindulgence with this slow walking through areas or slowly crawling through a really tight space. I thought it set a really great tone, and as a fan of the first game, I was enjoying it. I understood why people didn't like it, but I thought it was rather good. But then I finally arrive at a big fight, only to have it land just so sloppily. It makes it hard to justify all that waiting for a crescendo. It makes the fact that what many have said about combat, it shows up less in this game than the previous game, it makes it like this awkward silver lining, like, at least there's not a lot of combat since it's kind of regressed and not that great. It's like celebrating that your dinner portion is small because, the meat's overcooked and not very good. And I do have to make mention of the 30 FPS performance on the Xbox Series X. It seems completely indefensible. After playing the game on a mid-level PC at 1440 medium settings, and I got a constant 60 FPS. Quit telling people that 30 FPS is more cinematic, because it isn't. Quit saying it was a creative decision, because it wasn't. You didn't spend any time optimizing performance for 60 FPS on the Series X, and just admit that, instead of insulting everybody's intelligence. So, after all of that, what's my conclusion after it's all said and done? Well, I think the decision to switch from Unreal 4 to Unreal 5 was a giant mistake. I think it created a disruption in priority that resulted in a game that focused on things that just don't help the gameplay, but it foundationally harms the gameplay. I don't care that every combat move has been mo-capped, because the combat feels like garbage in comparison to the first game. I don't care that the visuals and the lighting are stunning, because you make me walk for huge portions of the game, which just feels like padding for a game that needed more time. But the truth is, the good aspects of this game will likely win awards. I think the audio design in Hellblade 2 is just there for the taking. They're gonna probably win that award. And then there's art direction, best performance, there's score and music. All of these categories are probably gonna be a sweep for Ninja Theory, and that's great. But the bad combat and the pacing and the incredibly short game length just pull all of the good things down, like a plane with too much cargo that it can't get any height. And I'm going to be honest, I want to finish the game, but in keeping things honest, it's only because of my strong connection to the first game and the character of Senua. If I didn't have that connection, this game would likely already be refunded and uninstalled, because ultimately, my fears feel very realized. It's more of a tech demo than a game. And while I've always said the first Hellblade is more of an experience than a video game, Hellblade 2 feels like it tilted the scales too far, and the video game part just slid all the way off, leaving a regressive disappointment in its place. But those are just my thoughts, and now it's time to hear your thoughts. And you can do that in a comment below. I like to reply to those comments, and you can come to the live stream. We put it in a card here. There's also a pinned comment down below typically. And if you like this content and you want more, remember to like, share, and subscribe.